Good evening, all. The idea of violence in video games as a cause of antisocial behavior is a popular notion. But are video games a cause of violence? We're going to explore primarily from the perspective of people who have performed research on the topic. As a gamer myself, I've wondered what the true impact of playing those games could be. We'll start with the history of video games in our society, how the research on the impact of games is constructed, and finally, possible implications of games going forward. Let's look first to how video games were initially perceived. In Dr. Romeo Vitale's article, Can Video Games Cause Violence?, he notes that painting video games as dangerous began with U.S. Surgeon General C. Everett Koop in 1983. Mr. Koop associated games with violence within the family. This concept took root and was a popular topic for a moral majority who viewed it like other new forms of entertainment in the past. It was the source of a number of ills like rock music before it, television before that, and comic books even before that. With the progression of time and an accumulation of research articles that would seem to support this point, the software companies that developed these games constructed the ESRB, Educational Software Rating Board, which developed an age-based rating system in 1994. After this act, there were still mounting concerns, even to the point that the parents of victims in mass shooting events went after the video game manufacturers in court for the violence their games portrayed. Now that we can better understand what brought about this cultural concept of video games, let's take a look at how these studies are done. Patrick Markey, author of In Defense of Violent Video Games, points out that participants in studies attempting to gauge violent behavior are normally broken up into two groups, one that plays a violent game and another plays a non-violent game. After a short period, normally a quarter of an hour, they are surveyed to see their emotional state. Those who played the violent games are normally a bit ill-tempered, but their effects didn't seem to be long-lasting. He also found that contrary to the opinions of many researchers, even as the use of video games has grown, violent acts as a whole in our society have shrunk. Going a bit further on that topic, Carol Konczynski wrote an article in defense of violent video games. That based off of a longitudinal research study done on over 1,000 high school students for 4 years, that most of the aggression witnessed by people who play video games is linked to competition. Using racing games, they made note that it was less the game and more the competitive nature of the gamers that was about. Now that isn't normally the sort of research you hear about video games. In part, this is due to the fact that, as Mr. Markey noted in his article, that it makes more sense when there are advocacy groups funding research, and it's popular to focus your research on the most salacious parts of something like violent video games. With a bit more information about how the impact of games is studied, and more specifically, how they may be impacting us, let's look at what purpose they may serve in society. In Mastering the World of Psychology, Dr. Samuel Wood makes note that many psychologists believe that gaming, at least for adolescent males, may serve the function of addressing unacceptable feelings in a safe, virtual atmosphere, and that gaming in a group may function as a key social activity, given that more people than ever are picking up a controller and putting down a remote. Looking back at Ms. Konczynski's article in the research study, she was discussing they found that those playing cooperative games were actually less aggressive than those playing on their own. In addition, it was asserted by one of the researchers that yes, competition is linked to aggression, but that competition unto itself is not a bad thing. Going even further, in a research paper titled Playing Pro-Social Video Games Increases Accessibility of Pro-Social Thoughts, written by Tobias Greitmeyer and Sylvia Oswald, they found that when you actually had individuals play a game that was positive in nature, one where you may be assisting in saving an alien species, for example, you're more likely to think and pick out positive words over neutral or nonsense words. That correlation wasn't great, but there was a distinct positive trend. It's obvious that the impact of video games isn't clear-cut, it's complex, and it's an ever-evolving issue. Though there are certainly some issues with video games, it appears that at least early on in their existence, much of what was asserted turned out to be speculation. When in-depth research has been performed, the results have come back mixed, with most of what appeared to be negative results being short-lived. And finally, that although so much emphasis has been placed on the violent video games, It seems that most of the aggression seen does not come from violent images, but rather aggressive action in general. And with that, I thank you and good evening.